Let's start tonight with some sort of good news. New data from Stats Canada shows inflation is now under 4%, at 3.4% for the month of May. That's the lowest it's been in 2 years. But dig a little deeper into the data, and it's not quite as rosy a picture. The price of gas has dropped most significantly, taking the overall rate of inflation with it. But food prices are still stubbornly high and rising fast. Grocery prices were up 9% year over year in May, more than double the rate of headline inflation, and barely changed from the 9.1% increase back in April. A just released report from the Competition Bureau helps explain why. Take a look at this chart. It shows since December of 2021, food prices have largely been increasing faster than the cost of most other things. The Bureau crunched the numbers and determined Canadian grocers' food margins have increased by a modest but meaningful amount over the last 5 years, pre-pandemic supply chain problems, and pre the current inflationary period. Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne is responsible for the file but was unavailable for an interview. The government was not able to provide a minister to respond to the report today, any other minister. Champagne's office, though, did release a statement that says, in part, we will take the time to review its recommendations and see how we can make life more affordable for Canadians. So what should the government do? Jagmeet Singh is the leader of the NDP. Hi, Mr. Singh. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
I appreciate you making the time. Look, this report from the Competition Bureau underscores something I know that you have raised before, but it doesn't recommend further taxing corporations like you have recommended. Should you reconsider that approach and focus more on competition in the market versus taxing corporations?
I take a quick step back and say it's clear that people are hurting. It's clear that food prices are continuing to rise, and that the steps taken by the Bank of Canada are not bringing down the inflation when it comes to food prices, not making life more affordable for people when it comes to putting food on the table. The Competition Bureau acknowledges that more steps are needed. I think much more than what the Competition Bureau is suggesting. They're suggesting more competition. I agree. They're suggesting more transparency. Of course, I agree. But I think we need to be much more aggressive. The steps that they're proposing will take a long time to take action. We need something immediate, and that's why I'm still calling for the wealth tax. Other countries have done that, looking at excess profits, looking at profit-driven inflation. I just met with some experts at the Roosevelt Institute in New York City who are talking about the seller's inflation or profit-driven inflation, greedflation as we've called it, is clearly contributing to the cost of living going up. The IMF has also accepted that in a recent report, which is not a very progressive body. It's a very conservative body, if anything. They've also acknowledged it. So it's clear that profits are a problem, and that's something we need to look at.
But inherently, are profits a problem? I take your point that some of the gross food margins, for example, and that is what the Competition Bureau underscored, are contributing to us paying more at the grocery store. They said they were modest but meaningful. It's not like they said they were out of control and need to be tamed immediately by increasing taxes on corporations who, by the way, could then turn around and on-pass those extra costs onto you and I and everyone else at the grocery store.
Well, I look at what's happening. It's the extremes that's, I think, a problem for Canadians, that where Canadians are having the hardest time ever in recent history, the most difficult time buying groceries, that those very same corporate grocery stores are making the most profits they've ever made. Those two extremes are what's striking people as wrong. And that's becoming more and more clear that a significant portion of the cost of living crisis that people are experiencing, not just in Canada, but globally, a significant portion of that is profit driven. And profits are a normal part of an economic system that's based on the systems that we have. But if the profits are so high that they're driving up cost of living, then it becomes a serious problem.
But respectfully, Mr. Singh, when you say that they are a significant contributor to the prices that we're paying, what the Competition Bureau ascertained was that margins for these grocery stores, the big ones, and I think we have a graphic that shows Canadians just how concentrated the market is right now, how many of the grocery stores we shop on just fall under 3 different companies. Those margins generally increased by 1 or 2 percentage points since 2017. The reason they're contributing to greater overall profits when you look at it from a volume perspective is because they're selling more, right? It's not necessarily because their margins are bigger. They've gone up 1 to 2 percentage points. It's not nothing, but it's not, does that necessarily mean significant from where you sit?
Well, I'm looking at the general, when we started off this argument that we're seeing a significant trend here where higher profits are being earned by these companies. So it can't just be that they're increasing their prices to match the increased cost of the cost of goods going up or the cost of services going up, which was what some folks were saying. And then we started seeing that it looks like inflation is being used as cover to cover basically companies trying to make massive profits and CEOs using this as an opportunity to make more money off of people. And that is emerging as a significant factor, that the cost of living we're experiencing globally and in Canada, more and more evidence is mounting that there is a profit-driven inflation that we're experiencing, that companies are making more and more profit, and Canadians in our country and people around the world are suffering as a result. That's a problem. When companies are making so much profit at a time when people are struggling so much, that's what we're up against. When it comes to groceries, there is still something missing there, because we know that bread price fixing is something that has happened. There was a recent fine levied on that. We know that it is not outside of the norm that these companies could collude to increase prices. The fact that they're making such high profits and people are struggling so much doesn't sit well with Canadians, and we need to do something about it.
So what does your solution look like? You've talked about, for example, an excess wealth tax. Does that mean if a company makes a profit that you deem to be in excess of where it should be, they're going to have to pay more tax?
Well, we would look at other countries that have implemented this. So Germany, United Kingdom, Spain have all put in some form of excess profit tax. We can look at what other countries are doing. The notion is that there is a range of profit that companies have made, and the amount that's in excess of a normal range of profit in a time of pain like this would be an appropriate amount to then say, well, there's going to be a surcharge on that or an extra tax on that. To discourage companies gouging Canadians or gouging people. Not something that we want to look at. Other countries have done it. I think we need to be more aggressive when it comes to protecting Canadians. It's clear that these corporate CEOs are making more money than they've ever made before, bigger bonuses than they've ever made before. Their companies are making record profits. Canadians are hurting. We need to do something.
Do you have any proof that those windfall taxes in other jurisdictions have actually led to better outcomes for the people who live there? And by that, I mean, I think of the UK, for example, where inflation remains at record levels, where people are still finding it really difficult to afford basic necessities like food. And they do have a windfall tax there, and it hasn't changed the situation for them. Why would something here do anything different for Canadians?
Well, their windfall tax was focused on the oil and gas sector. So they didn't apply it to all sectors that are experiencing excess profits. They tailored it to one specific sector. The fact that they did it, I think, is evidence that they saw this as something that could be useful. The second thing is, I think, what we're up against is a choice. And the choice so far has been the Bank of Canada's approach to dealing with inflation has been to put all the pain on workers. Increasing interest rates has not significantly brought down the affordability for people, but it has certainly increased the burden. Mortgages are up. Rents have actually gone up as a result. It's made life harder for people. And I'm concerned that the only approach that's being taken to deal with the cost of living is to make the cost of living even harder for workers. That is a problem. That doesn't make any sense to me, that that's the only approach, when at the same time, those at the very top are making more money than they've ever made before. There is something inherently wrong with that approach, and that's what I want to challenge.
I think that there's a lot of Canadians listening to that who would agree that everything feels very punitive now. But there's one part of the puzzle that you didn't talk about that can affect inflation as well. That's fiscal policy. It's not just monetary policy. The government can rein in spending to help temper the rate of inflation as well. But the things that you have pressured the government to do, in fact, work to do the opposite.
Well, this is an important point, and I've heard the Conservatives make this argument. I was in committee when the person that they've cited, the Bank of Canada governor, was asked a question about inflation and deficit spending and the impact. And he made it very clear that, yes, there is some impact. But he said, given the rates of inflation that were being talked about, 8%, 9% for food, he said it is a very small portion when factoring all the other factors. So in fact, he, in some points, suggested it was not actually very significant at all, that the other factors are far more significant. He cited supply chain issues because of COVID. He cited the war in Ukraine. And now other economists are citing, in addition to those elements.
But he didn't cite corporate profits like you are.
He didn't. That's what I was going to get to. Other economists have now pointed that another major driver of that 9% inflation, if we look at food, is corporate profit. And we know that it's the case because now we're seeing more and more evidence mounting.
Okay, Mr. Singh, just before I let you go, I do want to ask you about former NDP MP Olivia Chow. winning the race to become Toronto's mayor last night. I looked at the breakdown of in which parts of the city she was ultimately successful, and much of it rather, was the downtown core. Your party in 2021 and 2019, even 2015, faced some major challenges and losses there to the Liberals. Is there a lesson you take out of Olivia Chow's campaign that you hope to apply to your next federal campaign?
Absolutely. First, a huge congratulations to Olivia. This is incredible news for Toronto. I'm so excited. And there's a lot of lessons learned. She talked about making it affordable to be able to find a home that you can rent or to own. She really talked about affordability when it comes to homes. Talked about making transit work, making life more affordable. All the things that we really believe in. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from. A lot of areas where Olivia was able to captivate people, motivate people to vote, where we want to also do the same thing. So we're really hopeful. We think a lot of what Olivia talked about will translate for us as well. So it gives us not just an exciting news for Toronto, but exciting news for the country because of the potential that that has for our future election.
Mr. Singh, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time tonight very much. Thank you.
Thank you.